All right, let's dive into this deep dive. We're tackling Silent Hill.
The movie?
Yeah, the 2006 film. You guys requested it.
Lots of requests for this one.
Yeah, tons. And we've got a ton of material to unpack. We're talking interviews with the filmmakers, behind the scenes, looks at the special effects.
Ooh, those creatures.
Right. And of course, we've got to talk about the fan reactions because, let me tell you,
They're divided, to say the least.
could put it mildly. But before we get lost in that fog, let's get everyone on the same page. For those new to Silent Hill.
The game, you mean?
Yes, the games. It's legendary for a reason. Psychological horror, mind-bending stories, monsters that make you sleep with the lights on.
It's like David Lynch designed a video game, right?
Exactly. So taking that and turning it into a movie, that's no easy feat.
No, not at all. It's one thing to create that atmosphere in a game where you're controlling the character.
Yeah.
You're immersed in it. But a film, it's got to work differently.
For sure. It's a totally different beast. And this film, it went for the gusto. They decided to adapt the very first Silent Hill game, the one from '99.
Classic.
Totally. But here's the thing. They also threw in some stuff from later games, Silent Hill 2 specifically.
Interesting. A little risky, maybe. You've got fans of the first game, and then you throw in elements from the sequel. It makes you wonder how well that went over. I'm really curious to dig into these fan reactions.
Oh, yeah. Some people were thrilled, others not so much. But before we get into all of that, let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say, the missing father in the film.
The protagonist switch.
Exactly. The game, you've got Harry Mason desperately searching for his daughter. But the movie, they put Rose, his wife, in the driver's seat. Bold move, right?
It is. I mean, does it work? That's the question. Maybe it's a way to bring something new to the story, explore a different angle on those classic horror tropes.
Yeah.
What do you think, listener? Did it work?
Right. It really makes you think about how that one change could impact the whole experience. One thing's for sure, though. Rose's dedication to finding Sharon, it definitely mirrors Harry's drive in the game. They just took a different route to get there.
True, true.
Speaking of different routes, let's talk visuals. I mean, this film is visually striking. It's like they crawled inside my nightmares and pulled out all the creepiest imagery they could find.
I had to say they nailed the atmosphere. It's oppressive, eerie, just like the games.
Oh, for sure. It's in the fog, those decaying buildings.
Yeah.
And don't even get me started on the creature designs.
So effectively disturbing. And speaking of those creatures, I was really impressed with their decision to use practical effects for most of them.
Oh, absolutely. It makes such a difference, doesn't it? That raw, tangible quality really gets under your skin.
It's so much more effective than just throwing CGI at everything.
Right. Like those nurses. Ugh, the way they moved gives me chills just thinking about it. And then there's Pyramid Head. You can't talk about Silent Hill without mentioning Pyramid Head.
Although I did notice some of the sources we looked at, especially those who hadn't played the games, found him a bit out of place.
It's true. He does sort of come out of nowhere if you don't know the deeper lore.
He's from Silent Hill 2, so his appearance here feels more like a nod to the fans than an integral part of this specific story. Which makes you wonder how much of these decisions were driven by the filmmakers versus studio execs wanting to check off those fan service boxes.
Yeah, it's a tough balance to strike, but you're right. It does make you think. Speaking of things that make you think, let's dive into some of the deeper stuff. Because this movie, it's not just about jump scares and monsters.
It's about something much more unsettling, isn't it? That psychological unease.
Exactly. And a lot of critics in our source material pointed to the connection between the town itself and Rose's internal struggle.
It's like the town becomes a reflection of her mental state, wouldn't you say?
Totally. Like that scene where she first arrives and everything starts to shift and decay around her as she gets more and more overwhelmed. One of the sources even compared it to the way our surroundings can seem to close in on us when we're feeling anxious or scared.
Our environment mirroring our internal state. That's Silent Hill in a nutshell. Especially for those who've played the games. They've experienced firsthand how the town preys on your deepest fears and regrets.
There's a reason they call it psychological horror. And it's not just the visuals either. The soundtrack plays a huge part in creating that atmosphere.
Akira Yamaoka's score is masterful. It gets under your skin, it just stays with you.
It's so haunting and melancholic. It really adds to the whole experience. I read an interview where the director talked about how important the music was to him. He said he wanted something that would stick with the audience long after they left the theater.
Well, mission accomplished, I'd say. I know I still get chills when I hear some of those tracks. There's that one, Promise, Reprise.
Yeah.
So good, but so unsettling.
For sure. It just adds another layer to that feeling of dread and unease that permeates the whole film. Although Some of our sources did feel like the film relied a bit too heavily on dialogue at times.
Ah, the age-old debate, show, don't tell. It's always a challenge with adaptations.
Right. How do you take something so atmospheric and translate it to a different medium without losing some of that subtlety? It's tough.
And let's be real, some things just don't translate perfectly.
Yeah.
But it's all part of the discussion, right?
Definitely. And speaking of discussions, we've got to address those fan reactions. So we've talked about the critics, but what about the fans? It seems like Silent Hill is one of those films that people either love or hate.
To be expected, right. I mean, it's based on such a beloved game series, and those games are so specific. It's hard to please everyone.
Definitely. Especially with a genre like horror, people have such strong reactions. Some fans in our sources were over the moon about the visuals, though. Like, they really appreciated how the filmmakers brought the game world to life.
The fog, the monsters, even just the overall atmosphere of decay and despair.
It's all there, right down to the smallest details. But for some fans, it wasn't enough.
It's like those fans had such a strong connection to the source material, they almost didn't want to see it changed in any way, even if those changes made sense for a film adaptation.
It's that whole debate about staying faithful to the source material versus creating something new, right?
And let's be honest, video game adaptations don't have the best track record. So attempting to tackle something as layered and psychological as Silent Hill was always going to be a gamble.
No doubt. But it's clear that this film, love it or hate it, sparked a conversation. People were talking about it, debating it, comparing it to the games.
It got under their skin, even if it wasn't always in a good way. And isn't that kind of the point of horror? To evoke a reaction, to stay with you long after the credits roll.
It's true. I mean, I still hear that soundtrack in my nightmares sometimes.
There you go. And that's what makes this whole discussion so interesting, right?
Yeah.
Whether you're a diehard fan of the games or you've never even touched a controller, Silent Hill, the film, has this ability to get under your skin.
It makes you think. And maybe that's the mark of a truly effective horror film, whether it's a perfectly faithful adaptation or not. So, to our listeners, we leave you with this. Does Silent Hill 2006 stand on its own as a terrifying and thought-provoking film, even without its video game origins? Give it a watch or a rewatch and decide for yourself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the foggy, unsettling world of Silent Hill.